folks. In a recent episode, we talked about how you go about being the solo sysadmin inside of a given business, right? And it kind of led me down the thought process of another common issue that a lot of sysadmins have to deal with, and that is the case of being a sysadmin with no budget, right? You've got to keep the lights on, and you have to keep everything running, but you have no budget to do so. What do you do in that situation, right? So I've got Eric Siron on again today. And we're going to go through a lot of stories that we've run into when we've been in that type of situation. We provide some guidance, some things that you need to watch out for. What do you prioritize when you finally do get a small little trickle of budget? And that and lots more in today's episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Hey folks, welcome to SysAdmin Weekly, the podcast by sysadmins, for sysadmins, and dedicated to all the tireless tech folks working out there in the trenches, day in, day out, to keep the digital world spinning. As always, I'm your host, Andy Syrewicze, and you are listening to episode 55, recorded on, making sure I have this right this time, July 27th, 2026. And today we are going to be talking about how to run IT with essentially no budget, because a lot of sysadmins find themselves in that situation, right? Hey, I need to keep this place running, but there aren't two nickels to rub together in order to keep the place running, right? So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. But before we get to that, we've got a ton of usual stuff that we get to here. Again, I've got Eric Siron with me today. Eric, how's it going, my friend?
I'm all right. How you doing, Andy?
Doing good. Can't complain. So I figured you and I have both had experience doing IT work for organizations that have struggled in the budget department. So I figured this would be a good episode for the two of us to tag team. So I'm looking forward to our discussion on this one today. So good to have you as always, my friend. And those of you who are new to the show, welcome. Hope you enjoy your time here. If you want to find all of the links associated with the show, you can go out to www.sysadminweekly.com. You'll find links there to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You'll find links to the GitHub discussion board where we have some community conversations happening, things like that. You'll also find a link to our partner, our companion newsletter, newsletter.sysadminweekly.com. And that newsletter is just, like I said, it's a companion piece to this podcast. The podcast is, of course, the main thing, but the newsletter is supplementary. It includes, a couple of interesting community links, a little bit of commentary, things like that. Highly suggest you check it out if you're, more of the type that likes to read instead of necessarily listen or watch. So be sure to check that out too. And of course, now we have a couple of our regular recurring segments to get to here as well. Now, our intros can be a little bit long, so if you want to go straight to the main segment of today's episode, skip to about the 20-ish minute mark. Otherwise, you can use the chapter markers depending on the platform that you are running on. So with that, let's get to our first recurring segment here. It's our News React segment. This is the segment of the show that my co-host and we talk about a news story that has caught our eye over the last week or two, and we discuss. And so, Eric, I guess I'll go first on this one. My news item is kind of a follow-up to something I've talked about the last two episodes. So in last week's episode 54, Eric, it was you were on that episode as well too. You and I talked about how there is some anti-open source-ish talk amongst AI company leadership. And we were kind of quoting some of the stuff from memory. I made sure in last week's show notes I went through and I actually cited everything that we talked about with precise URLs and everything, so you can actually go see who actually said what. Again, we were kind of going off memory last week, but the overall message last week was accurate. Now, fast forward to this week, right? Last week you had OpenAI, Anthropic leadership basically saying, hey, open source is dangerous. One of them said there was AI communism and, right, a whole bunch of different, eyebrow-raising things about open source models, open weight models. Fast forward to this week. Again, we are recording this on July 27, 2026. let me get the news story out here. There was a coalition of 25, I believe it was, 25 companies who all signed a letter to the current U.S. administration here, the Trump administration, um, basically saying, "Hey, we need open source and open weight models because," and I've got a couple of quotes here in the article, and I'll put this in the show notes. The two big names quoted in the article are Satya Nadella and I never know how to say his name. The CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang. I I don't know if I'm
I would
saying the
guess it would
last
be
name
similar
right.
to that. Yeah,
Um,
I'm not sure either, but
yeah, and so where is it here? Nadella wrote on X, open weight models are essential to a healthy AI ecosystem. And where was the other quote? Bunch of ads, not a ton of ads, but some ads on here kind of making it broken up. Um, yeah, that was the one quote I wanted to highlight. It was like clearly, I mean, very cut and dry. Nadella sees open source, open weight models as a benefit for the ecosystem. And then you had a bunch of companies sign on to that. Just looking at the list, I see Hugging Face, which is interesting, given they were recently the victim of a rogue AI from OpenAI. So that was interesting. The Linux Foundation's on the list, Meta's on the list, Microsoft, Perplexity, NVIDIA, Mozilla, um, ServiceNow, Box, CrowdStrike, Dell. I mean, a lot of big names on that letterhead. So it seems that the rest of the industry has, rightly so, deemed that this is a bad idea. And so, I don't always agree with industry leaders, but the vast majority of industry leaders, in this particular case, I feel are on the right side. So good to see this, in my opinion. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Eric, but otherwise, I'll hand it over to you for your news react item.
oh, mostly always like if open source is so terrible, why can't the commercial industry beat it?
Right. Yep.
So,
Yep. I'm with you. I'm with you. I hear you. So, what do you got for news react, my friend?
well, I kind of want to go back and find out if this was deep fake or not because it seemed like it had to be, but uh,
Hmm.
I
Interesting.
saw a video of Sam Altman standing on a stage at some venture capitalist thing and basically said OpenAI has no path to profitability at this time. He said that their plan right now is to push forward as hard as they can, get to generative AI, real generative AI, and then say, or general AI probably, and then ask it, how do we become profitable from this point? That's what he said on this stage, which made me like that. I don't know, but in the after that segment, then there were a lot of people who were. I don't want to use the word commenters because that sounds like random people typing stuff into Facebook, but like
Right.
more like pundits, I guess we would use that term.
Right.
Who then got on and said, well, they noticed that OpenAI is no longer bringing or allowing the CFO to speak during anything to do with the financials of
Huh.
the company. And some like
That's
digging into records are like, yeah, the CFO has kind of been like, we have a problem, right? And what I found most interesting about that is I think it was Lehman Brothers. If you remember the financial crisis in 2008, Lehman Brothers was the financial institution
Mhm.
that collapsed first. And then
Yup.
um, they had the same thing. Their CFO was like, this is not going well. So they just stopped inviting the CFO to things. Okay. And a lot
Uh,
of, I mean, there's so many issues with that anyway. For one thing, you get the SEC going, why is the CFO not here? Right. Because the CFO has a fiduciary duty to tell
yeah.
people things. So that's a huge red flag. So, like, oh, well, interesting parallel there between one collapsed company and Sam Altman has already brought up one company that he couldn't do what he sold, and he sold all his stuff and got out before that company collapsed. Now it looks like he may be doing it again. I think the problem is OpenAI has hit that point that he may not get away with it this time like he did last time.
Oh boy.
But in some of this, and then they started cascading out and going, all right, so OpenAI is like the obvious one, and then of course Microsoft has pulled back. One of the
Yep.
pundits was like, "Have you noticed how like every month Microsoft has to give another update on their relationship with OpenAI? And like, does that sound like a healthy partnership to anybody?" You
Probably
know,
not. No.
um, so but it's not just them. They're like, and then you look at like Anthropic and all this stuff. Like they're on $20 a month models. Like that doesn't add up to a profitable company.
No.
So they're trying
No.
to do everything they can to get you onto the $20 model, but then they're gonna have to do something else at some point. So
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting.
I
I'm
wonder.
curious what to see, but I can tell you what I've been asking AI is where do I reinvest my money so that I can survive an AI bubble because bursting because it looks like
I was just gonna say, is this the bubble getting ready to pop?
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
not good. There's so many bad things going on right now with this and
uh, so I
people are
am
starting to figure out there's no
by
money. Like they have been doing the circular thing. We've talked about this a lot, how the AI
yeah.
companies are all just trading money with each other and doing all this. Well, that money's starting to dry up as it had to.
Yep.
They
Yep.
showed like the SpaceX just went public, and the comment on that they showed the chart. So what usually happens, a company does IPO, which means their initial public offering, and so when it first gets listed on the market and you can buy it, right? And then usually, in my experience anyway,
Yep.
after an IPO, a company tends to drop, and then it works its way back up, and then history
Yep.
holds on and does what it does, and over time it should go up. SpaceX is going IPO down. And the comment the guy put on it is like, that doesn't look like a company that went IPO. That looks like a cryptocurrency that did a pump and dump.
Pump and dump. Yeah, I saw a couple of headlines like that myself. That's interesting. Man. I'm by far not a financial analyst, but I've been saying for a while, I've had a gut feeling for a while, like it feels like we're due for a correction. We're
Yeah,
due for a correction. Oh man,
you absolutely
interesting
are.
times.
It's going to be not great.
Yeah. So, well, how about let's switch to some nerd talk to hopefully, bring this the general feeling of this episode back up a notch here from the doom and gloom of the AI bubble popping. But I guess I'll go first with my nerd hour segment. This is the segment of the show where my co-host and I we discuss the geeky nerdy things we've been doing in our spare time. And boy, Eric, I've got like the penultimate nerdy thing that I've been working on here. Let me tell you. So this spans um, PowerShell, Python, generative AI, GitHub, and video games. You ready for this?
Okay.
So, did you play Baldur's Gate back in the day? Baldur's Gate 1.
Oh, yeah. Quite a bit.
So remember this is a yeah, so for those people that don't know what Baldur's Gate 1 was, it was an isometric RPG. Top down, you built a character based on the D&D second edition rule set, roughly on the D&D second edition rule set. See, I'm nerdy enough to know where the rules deviate from the actual written rules, but that's a whole different thing. Anyway, I've been playing this game on and off for I don't know how long it's been since it's been out. 20 years, 25, right? I'm old. So, as you can
Uh-huh. Sure you
imagine,
are.
right? As you can imagine, I've played it enough to know like where basically everything is. I can like basically break the game because I know the rule set so well, etc., etc. For a long time, I seem to play this game like every 6 months, do a playthrough. And for a long time, I had a PowerShell script that I had written with arrays in it and everything that would essentially randomize a run. It would choose the character class that I was going to play, it would choose the alignment for them, and then it would choose the 5 non-player character party members that you would gather throughout the game world and play the game with you, right? So I'm like, you know what? It's been a PowerShell script for a while. It works fine, but I'd love it if I could run this as a little web app when I'm on the road or something and I want to start a new game. And so I'm like, you know what? Let's instead of doing something super serious this weekend, let's do something fun. So with the assistance of Claude and my knowledge of Hugo and PowerShell and Python, between Claude and myself, I was able to spin up a little web app. I just hosted it on GitHub Pages, and for those people that are interested, I will put that out on the I'll put that on the show notes so you can take a look at it. So that's one thing. But I also had some pending work to do on my Pomo CLI app that I have hosted on my GitHub. Again, it's just a little console-based, ncurses, menu-driven Pomodoro timer. Now, had another community member make some. They did a pull request, so I had to review the pull request, incorporate it. I made a few changes. I added a feature where you can select where you want the Pomodoro logs to go instead of just defaulting to the user's profile. The person that added some code to the pull request, they had made it so you could display in Unicode characters, so it looked a little bit more polished in the UI, right? Well, macOS has an issue with Unicode, which I'll come back to in a second. But I added the option inside of the app to select either ASCII or Unicode for its display method. Anyway, this is where it comes to the part of the story where it's a great example that highlights the importance of human in the loop when it comes to AI outputs. So, like I said, there's an issue with Unicode displaying on macOS, and that like I said, I've been using ncurses for the menu system of this little CLI app. And in order to do Unicode, you need a version of ncurses W, that particular library that supports wide character sets. There is a hard-coded ncurses library baked into macOS that is very, very, very difficult to work around. It almost forces any ncurses thing to use the Mac provided, the Apple provided ncurses library. So that's why I kept the ASCII option inside of the app. Now, Claude knew this whole sequence of events after we got done making these changes, and Claude, I asked it to create the project documentation, update the README. And it was interesting. It suggested a workaround in the README to the Unicode issue. It said if you use Homebrew to install MiniForge, it will pull in a supported version of the ncurses W library. Now, I look at that with my security hat and I'm like, okay, what's MiniForge? Let's go look at MiniForge. And it's basically an easy on-ramp to Conda and Mamba, which, without getting into all the details, essentially it's a, and this is the big security issue with it, it is a package manager, right, for various packages like ncurses and things like that. So not only have we added a dependency to solve this issue, right, by installing MiniForge, we've enlarged the attack surface of the system, but we have also introduced a net new software supply chain on the system as well, too, right? And to put it in perspective, all of this just so we can display varying shades of blocks inside of a console Pomodoro timer. So me, the human with the 24 years of experience in the IT industry, I look at that and I'm like, no, no way. That is a terrible idea, right? And so all the other documentation was fantastic, but that is a case where, while technically correct, AI cannot invoke good judgment as to whether its intelligence is applied appropriately or not. And that's where the human is the important factor there, right? So anyway, a bit of a long-winded nerd hour segment from me, but I don't know. What about you, Eric? What do you got?
Basically nothing. I've been working on a long project, garage shelving, working too hard, doing too much, but no tech stuff this week.
And that's fine. Sometimes you need a break from the tech stuff. I'm like that some weekends. I mean, this last weekend was a case of, the wife was busy with something else. The kid was with his uncle somewhere. So it's just me and the dog sitting here at the house. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to do some tech stuff this weekend. So that's what I did. So anyway, the other thing I wanted to do before we get to our main segment is I wanted to make sure we highlighted some community comments. We got a comment on last week's episode, Eric, where during the nerd hour segment, your nerd hour segment last week, you were talking about some cable runs inside your house, right? Talking about maybe needing to run some Ethernet and things like that. We had a one-line comment on last week's episode on YouTube from Unselfless was the username. But basically said, you had said something along the lines of, I can't get an electrician to come and run Cat 6 for me or whatever. And this commenter basically said, yeah, same thing. I'm quoting the comment here. Most people, even electricians, won't touch it for some reason. Nope, they won't touch it for some reason. I agree with it because it sucks. It sucks running cable. It is not fun, right? Crawling through crawl spaces and drop ceilings and yeah. So I've got one other comment here from our GitHub discussion board, Eric, and this is a comment on the solo sysadmin episode we did, episode 53. And I'm going to quote the comment here. So my stories aren't super exciting, but I definitely had one where I asked how they image computers. So basically talking about coming in as the solo sysadmin, and you never know what you're going to get, right? And so they continue. They were using enormous, fully loaded, in quotes, fully loaded fat images for deployment, which every year effectively DDoS to the network while they re-imaged classrooms, etc. The first thing I did, and luckily I had done this at a previous job, was to remove all apps, settings, config from the WIM, strip it down to just a patched OS, and deploy everything else separately. And also build/roll out a full SCCM setup. It was a glorious triumph of mine and very clear and quick. Hey, let's not only fix this, but let's fix it up real good. So I have run into that before where you walk into a business and, we image our PCs, and if there's a virus, we just re-image it. And wait, why is your WIM file massive? Oh, because we baked all of the applications that we could ever maybe want to use. Maybe kind of, we put WeatherBug in there, the images I'm talking about, the master gold image. They didn't put WeatherBug in there. I was making a joke, but with everything that they had put in the WIM, it feels like that, right? And so I responded to the comments on the GitHub discussion board, and I basically said, I never understood the let's put all the things in the WIM file, because there's so many other ways to deploy applications en masse, right? And you bake it into the image, you lose that granularity to just roll out a new version of that application or roll out a new version of that application, right? So I'm glad I'm not the only one that has ever run into this. So
Probably was something like, this is the way we've always done it. What's wrong with that?
right. And when you're the solo sysadmin, a lot of times that's the case. It's like nobody questions it. It's always been done this way, so it must be fine. It must be the way, right? So anyway, so appreciate the comments, folks. If you want to, be read on the show, I love reading comments, but if you want to be read on the show, you can always leave comments on the YouTube versions of the show, the Spotify versions of the show, or like this case, you can go out to the GitHub discussions board. Every week I post a thread about the current episode, so be sure to check those out. So let's get to our regular main segment here. And again, today we are talking about running IT with no budget. So, you're a small department, or maybe you're a solo sysadmin like we've been talking about a lot on the show lately, and you are tasked with keeping the business running, and oh, by the way, you have no budget. Have fun. Right? I in my MSP days, I had worked with a lot of customers that were in this situation. I had one nonprofit I did a ton of work for, and it's in the name, nonprofit, right? They didn't have a ton of money, a ton of budget for IT. And so what I figured we'd do for this episode, Eric, is kind of talk about some of our experiences running IT with no budget, provide some tips, tricks, and just generally discuss. And so I figured a good starting point is just kind of doing a level set here and the reality of a zero budget shop, because I have run into administrators that they've only been admins at massive enterprises, right? And there's budget and they have money to spend. Not a lot of, well, I don't want to say not a lot. Not every admin has been in a situation where they've had no budget. And so that's kind of why I wanted to do a level set here, right? And so what I've seen in these situations, again, kind of, painting the story here, right? A lot of situations I've run into where there's no budget, you see systems that are long out of date, right? The hardware is past warranty, long past warranty, or operating systems are no longer supported, or applications are no longer supported, or let me give you another example here. I used to do work for a manufacturing organization, and in the quality testing lab, there was a machine running not MS-DOS, PC-DOS version 4. Why? Because the quality lab, they had budget. This is a big manufacturing organization, but they did not have the budget needed to upgrade this machine. And if it wasn't broke, don't fix it. So that was another extreme example. But again, this was a non-internet connected machine. Seriously, super old. It basically blew air through solenoids, if I remember correct. I don't remember exactly what it did. It did some sort of test, pass-fail test on parts, right? So it didn't need to do a whole lot. But again, an example of out-of-date operating systems when there's limited budget. And so it comes down to a couple of core skills, right? You need to be able to squeeze safe, workable years out of gear and software that you can't afford to replace, right? That's really what it comes down to from my mind. And, before I move on to another concrete example here, Eric, I'm going to let you get a word in edgewise. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to preface this conversation with.
Well, this is one of my passion projects, I think, or not project isn't the right word there, but yeah, I started out most of my years in the industry were working in places where, yeah, if you had to get the credit card out, you were doing it wrong. That was like the default. So, which trains you to be inventive and, you know, find out the truth behind a lot of things that you're told. And then from there, I moved on into the larger IT where, sometimes I still like getting in trouble isn't exactly the right thing, but sort of like, we can't spend money frivolously, but we can buy stuff if it would, reduce the hours you're working or whatever. So yeah,
Right.
I've been on both sides of the coin now, so I still have that special soft place for all those admins that are, yeah, I have no budget, but I still have to fix the problem. So uh, been there.
You've lived it. And so there's one case I ran into in my travels where this was a yet a different MSP customer that I had worked with over the years, and they were running a then long end of life Cisco ASA device at a small remote site. And this is a case where I've always been a big open source guy, and back in my MSP days, we had an engineering team of, I don't know, there was like 25 or 30 of us. And if it's got Unix or Nix in the name, send it over to Syrewicze. He's the guy, right? And which I was fine with. I always liked working on Nix systems, but it also gave me a view of open source as a possible solution in situations like this. So again, this case, end of life Cisco ASA at a small remote site. This business was struggling. And it's funny you mentioned the 2008 financial crisis. It was right around that time, and this business was struggling as a result. So they didn't have a lot of budget. Meanwhile, the Cisco ASA firewall was out of support, had a known vulnerability, and they couldn't afford to replace it with yet another Cisco firewall. So what do? Right? And this was a case where they had plenty of old hardware lying around, not actively in use. And I for a normal customer, I would not recommend this. I would recommend that you go the supported route, you go, buy something from a vendor like Cisco, WatchGuard, whatever, right? For your firewall device, you have a warranty on it so that it's covered for hardware, right? You do all those things under normal circumstances. In this case, they had some old systems lying around that were all identical, so there's some hardware redundancy if needed. And we actually proposed and implemented spinning up a machine that ran an open source firewall on it. Now, I don't remember exactly what it was, if it was OPN Sense or PF Sense. I don't remember the exact one. But basically created a custom firewall for them that did not have the vulnerability that the Cisco ASA had at the time. Now, again, the hardware is just run of the mill piece, workstation hardware. Like I said, they had a ton of them. So like if a component failed, we could swap something in. We made an image backup of the system once it was all configured. We knew that we were putting in something potentially brittle, but we took steps to, remediate that if needed. So I've always felt that in this particular case, open source has always been it's always been a lifeline in situations like this where budget is an issue. Open source can really help when the budget is tough, but you have to be able to answer can I support this question? Can I recover it if something goes wrong? And so I wanted to give another concrete example of where I've run into this and something I've done to help alleviate the we have no budget conversation. There's a ton of other open source tools I can think of that have helped that would help in this type of situation. Firewalls, file servers. Man, the number of Linux-based Samba servers I've spun up over the years to either assist with this exact situation or to assist with a migration or something, right? A project temporarily. You know, I don't know about you, Eric, but I've probably got enough parts lying around just in my house, let alone, the places I used to do SysAdmin work for, that I could probably put together, cobble together 10 or 15 systems, So, I mean, utilizing that hardware you have to the maximum degree when you have no budget is kind of a superpower, I guess I would say. So, anyway, I don't know if you've had similar experiences in the situation, Eric, or certain stories you'd like to share.
Oh, I don't know about any like major stories. It kind of seemed like stuff like that was the norm. Didn't
Yeah.
quite go to that extreme, but yeah, all kinds of yeah, it's out of warranty. You're not going to get it fixed. You're not going to get it replaced. You're going to have to improvise something. It's more normal than not, I think, in a lot of those cases. And what happens, I think, is you wind up getting some. I think today they would call it prosumer grade.
Yep.
That it's not Cisco, and people, well, you got to have Cisco. Like you really don't.
No.
But ran into a lot of semantic firewalls. I don't even know if they still make those. I
Man,
don't even know
that
if they're
takes
still
me
in that
back.
business, but yeah, stuff like that. And there were a couple of companies who were, yeah, they weren't Cisco, but they also weren't, NetGear. So, well, actually, NetGear is now making some of that mid-tier stuff. So that's really what you need to do is remember that Cisco's charging a premium because they've got that Bay Bridge logo on the side of it, not necessarily because
Yep.
they're the only game in town. So, um, that's usually the way that we steered people is like, stop looking at Cisco. Remember that there are competitors, and one way to stay on budget is to buy something that's appropriate for your business.
Yeah. Yep. For sure. I can't tell you how many times I've run into that, like, we have to buy Cisco. Has to be Cisco. Must be. Like, I, granted, the MSP I used to work for, we were a Cisco shop. So, I mean, that was always, the first thing suggested. But, we had other things in our back pocket too for those more budget conscious customers. I mean, um, I I can think of one case, and again, I'm going back to like the mid to like the mid to late 2000s here. Um, you remember those old 3Com hubs
Oh,
that
yeah,
were
absolutely.
everywhere?
Yes, absolutely.
I I'm sure there's a 3Com hub still running somewhere out there today. But we had a couple of those that we would lend in these types of situations where, okay, a switch died, they have a new one on order, or right, budget is tight and they can't afford a new one, and because they're a customer, we want to do the right thing, take care of them. Here's a 3Com that you can have for pennies, right? So I think we did that once or twice that I can think of in the past, but yeah, I mean, it really kind of changes the thought process, right? Because there's a lot of admins that maybe they started in the enterprise space. You're used to having that budget, and oh, my Cisco switch died. Let me go out and look at my options for, uh, you know, enterprise grade replacements. And then they come to a small shop where maybe they're the solo sysadmin, right? Or there's no budget. It changes that entire. The whole mindset is different because now how do I how do I provide the same level of service with no budget? And you can do it using open source tools or, like you said, a Linksys switch or something like that. But you just have to be conscious of the downsides. So again, let's look at the Cisco ASA to an open source firewall conversation. I kind of mentioned it already. Right? That workstation we put in place with an open source firewall on it, obviously that workstation is, like I said, it was old, out of date, prone to failure, but we planned for it. And so I mean that same mindset applies to anything that you would replace in this particular situation. So
Right.
um I feel like there was an AD conversation you and I had a while back that was very similar to this line of conversation. Um I don't remember what it was though. I had it earlier, but I've lost it since. Um, because I know you've talked on the show before about how um you were the guy that would come into a business where the previous IT guy was, you know, charging a whole bunch, and you guys were more expensive, but you'd get the job done quicker, right? More efficiently. Therefore, when everything is said and done, you and the shop you were working for was cheaper. And I feel like you had an AD story attached to that at one point in time, but I'm blanking on. Maybe I'll
No,
remember
that
it
is right.
before we.
Yeah, like one of them, like the guy just didn't believe in Active Directory, so everywhere you went was work groups, regardless of anything. And
Ah, yes, yes,
so,
yes, yes. That's
yeah,
why I
that
wanted to bring that up. I remember now because the work groups require more management over time, right? You're going to spend more time managing that, and I remember thinking about that when I put this outline together. You'd think I would have written down the details of the Active Directory story, but I did not. But that's another mindset shift that you have to make in the no budget situation as well too, because you have to do more with less. Maybe some of the solutions you're putting into place might require more labor to support and keep running, but at the same time take those measures where you can to reduce the amount of labor required. So, like in this case, if it's small business, they're running as a work group. I hope nobody is running as a just a standalone single work group anymore today. But if you are, you'll save a bunch of time by switching to a domain. So again, that seemed relevant to this particular conversation. The next thing on my list here I wanted to talk about, again, keeping with the open source conversation, is where are the biggest no budget wins? So we've talked about open source kind of being a lifeline for these no budget situations. I see big no budget wins around monitoring. There are a ton of fantastic open source monitoring tools. Eric, I know you're a big Nagios guy.
Yeah.
You've actually written a bunch of articles on Nagios, if I remember correctly.
A few. Yeah.
Yeah.
Still work with it every
Um,
day. Yeah.
yep. Yep. Logging, ton of open source logging servers, ton of amazing network tools. Um, I remember sitting in the engineering room one day. Our NetOps team at the time was in that same room, and I remember them talking about like, "Hey, I need to get my license around for my fancy Cisco network scanning utility or whatever." Well, I don't remember exactly what it was. It was some paid utility, right, for deep network inspection and things like that. And I'm like, guys, you've heard of Nmap, right? Yeah, we don't want to use Nmap. No, why would we want to use Nmap, right? I'm like, okay, what are you trying to do with your fancy tool? And I don't remember exactly what it was, but I'm like, hey, look, I got the Nmap document, man Nmap, got the manual out for Nmap. Scroll. Hey, look, you see this command line switch? This does exactly what what you're trying to do with your fancy tool. And it's free and available, right? So another example. So I don't know. I love Nmap. I think Nmap has gotten a bit of a bad rep because it's often seen as like a red teaming hacker penetration tool, penetration testing tool. But I use it all the time just in my house here because I'm like spinning up a new VM in my lab. Like, okay, I need an IP address. I need an IP. Nmap -SN, the network address /24, and of course my Ubiquity. So Ubiquity has a sidebar. Ubiquity has a uh oh man, why am I a honeypot? I couldn't think of the name. Ubiquity has a honeypot feature that I have enabled. You assign it an IP, and it makes itself look like a nice juicy target on the network. So obviously, when I run an Nmap scan on the network, my Unify is like, "Whoa, hey, bad things are happening. You have to look at this alert right now." Anyway, so again, we've been talking a lot about hardware, but it kind of applies to software as well. What else here? Tools. Yeah, so I'm just trying to think of my tool set that I've used. We mentioned Nagios, syslog servers on the Linux side, obviously are good ones. um, Another area that we've talked about firewalls, we've talked about switches, storage. So, SANs, right? I've run across customers that like, hey, we need to store all this massive stuff on premises, and our EMC SAN died, right? And it's going to be $50,000 to replace the SAN, whatever. I've been in those situations before, and we've had to build temporary budget SAN and NAS solutions. To your point, maybe you don't use like the massive enterprise vendor EMC in this particular case, but you go to a more of a budget vendor. I can't tell you how many times I had, lower tier, you know, NetGear ReadyNASs bailing certain customers out for a length of time. We actually had a couple of NetGear ReadyNASs just sitting on the shelf for that particular situation where customer has SAN issues or they're doing a SAN migration, whatever, they need a block of storage temporarily. Here you go. It's not top tier, but it gets the job done. And I think that applies, that exact phrase. It's not top tier, but it gets the job done. I think when you are a sysadmin in a no budget situation, that should be your mantra, right?
Mhm.
It's not top tier, but it gets the job done. So anyway,
Yeah,
so
I will say, having been on both sides, like I said before, the people in the bigger organizations who will sneer when you say iSCSI is unbelievable.
oh,
But
I
like, you know
know.
how many problems I've solved with that at budget and everything was fine? Like what I need, and and I've had a couple of people like, we put in iSCSI, these are the problems that we had. And like, okay, those are legitimate problems, and I obviously there are certain places where it's just not going to work. But but a lot of people are like, well, it's just obviously trash. You have to have fiber channel and or storage spaces direct or all these other things, and like you don't really. And like one drum I've been beating for a long time is I don't care what you think about iSCSI, it's going to outlive all of us. So turn your nose up at it if you want, but I'm solving problems with it and saving people money. And sorry, I'm not going to feel bad about that.
Man, I love iSCSI. That's always been my go-to as well too. I'm with you, man. I've come across the iSCSI haters before, and I can say it as somebody who has managed both iSCSI fabrics and fiber channel fabrics. And I tell you right now, the iSCSI management is so much easier than fiber channel.
Yeah.
Not to mention, so when you install fiber channel inside of your data center, it needs to be installed properly and it has to be managed properly, right? I mean,
Hmm.
I it's a pet peeve of mine when I've walked into businesses to do a storage project for them and they're running, you know, fiber as their storage backend,
Right.
and you see the orange fiber cables bundled up and zip tied with the Ethernet cables. You know how many times I've seen that? And I have screamed in my brain while I was standing there
What are
looking
you
at it.
doing?
And I'm just like, why? What? Why? Why? Tell me
What?
why. I've run into that 4 or 5 times at least.
Mm.
So I mean, when you choose fiber channel, in order to do it properly, you have to decide that, like, okay, I'm going to install dedicated runs, dedicated mounts, separate the fiber cable from all the other cabling. That way, when somebody's pulling cable or something inside of the data center or the server rack, I don't
Hmm.
accidentally crunch a fiber cable, you know?
Oh yeah, because they'll tug on that Ethernet stuff, and because you can, it usually can put up with it, and
Yep.
fiber doesn't want
No,
don't be
does
yanking
not
on
work
your
that
fiber.
way.
Yeah,
Does
y'all
not
are
work
aware
that way.
that's glass, right? That's glass in there. You be nice to it.
Oh man. All right, rant over on that one. You got me talking about fiber. And I mean, that's another reason why I'll choose iSCSI, because
Yeah,
runs on Ethernet. Ethernet's more this is my opinion. I feel Ethernet is more standardized and easier to work with than fiber is as a
there's a
medium.
lot of truth to that. Because all the yeah,
I don't have data
I
to
guess
back
if
that
you
up. That's
go,
just my opinion.
yeah, kind of. I don't think I would worry some. What I don't like is how expensive fiber switches are. So if you
Yes.
go into a small business and they want a fiber device, the first thing I try to do is like, can I do direct cabling? Can I do like you could do like a 2 node Hyper-V, VMware, assume the others are the same. You could do 2 nodes with shared storage over fiber with direct connect, but you can't do three. I don't know of anybody that's got three HVAs in their fiber channel SAN.
Right.
So you can only do two. Then you don't need a fiber switch. And you also don't need the big crazy runs and everything. And that can come out okay cost wise.
Yeah.
A lot of times I wonder like if a fiber switch is making it itchy on your budget, iSCSI is probably what you should be doing.
Yeah.
But again, like I said, you can run into people. Well, just you can't do iSCSI. That's the devil's network right there. That's not okay. And all right, but I try to keep them off fiber switches at that point. 'Cause those, whew,
Yep. And in the larger scope of our discussion today, right? Running IT on zero budget. I think there's a point to be made here as well about choosing the proper medium as well too. Because in this case, with budget in mind, not only is iSCSI going to be more friendly and from a budget perspective, the parts are more readily available as well too. Plus, you can use lower tier parts with iSCSI, whereas Fiber Channel probably doesn't really have lower tier components, right? So, for example, let's say I have a NIC fail on a server and it was an iSCSI NIC. I was using it for iSCSI. I don't have any budget, but I can go tear a 2.5 gig Ethernet card out of that server over there that's not being used anymore, install it. I have hardware readily available, more likely if I'm using iSCSI inside of my
yeah,
environment. So
yeah,
um, that being budget conscious leads to some of those types of architecture decisions as well too.
yeah.
So now, you know, we spent some time talking about some of our personal stories dealing with, low budget situations. Um, in terms of maintaining, keeping things running in low budget situations, I think to me would align with a lot of what we talked about in the solo sysadmin episode. Um, make sure the foundation is good. Your identity stuff, your DCs are good and running. All the core fundamental stuff is working and running. Now, what do you do when you do end up having some budget finally trickle its way down to the IT department? Where do you go with it? In my mind, it comes to that budget that comes in, it needs to go for maximum risk reduction. Do your backups need any love and attention, right? Does the perimeter need to be improved? Does your firewall need to be updated or renewed? Does your identity capabilities inside of your SaaS ecosystem need to be I don't know, an upgraded license be applied, like Entra ID, for example. You need to go from P1 to P2 because you need some of the additional features that are included in Plan 2. Are there any single points of failure in the environment that you've been losing sleep over that could potentially take the whole organization down, right? Those types of things would be where I'm going to direct the budget to first. But I want to get your take as well, Eric.
Yeah, I really want to clue in on or key in on your backup. Like if your backup is not up to snuff, do that. Um,
Yep.
One place where I really will not go budget is on backup stuff. And when I say that, I don't mean you got to find top tier because I don't feel like a lot of times in the backup space, whoever's top tier is the best one at anyway. Um, what I mean by that is a whole lot of people will put everything in and be like, all right, how can I back this up for free? And the gap between free backups and cheap backups is enormous. So,
Yep.
yeah, the first place is if your backup is running off some free hand coded, hand wired, you did all the stuff yourself solution, that's the first thing to go. Absolute first thing to go.
Yep. And I can speak to that because I've gone through a lot of backup changes in the home lab recently. I spent a lot of time on the show talking about Restic, open source backup application, full end-to-end encryption. Does an amazing job. It's a really good tool. It's also free, which is nice. I will say there's not a good management plan for it. It does not
Ooh,
exist. There's not a good management plan for it. And so for a onesie twosie type system here in a home lab, it's fine. Works great. If I'm going to try and use it to back up an entire environment that should probably have a real backup application attached to it, it doesn't feel warm and fuzzy. And so, recently uh, like I mentioned in either last week or the week before, I mentioned how I rebuilt the lab on Hyper-V, right? So I was able to put, and again, I can do this because I work for Hornet Security. Um, we have a virtual machine backup product. And so I was able to put in a paid backup product into my lab and use it to protect my ecosystem. And I tell you what, the level of effort, night and day difference. Again, I'm not plugging our VM backup product. I'm just using it as an example because I had everything in my environment set up and protected in, I don't know, an hour or two. Whereas Restic, it was hours and hours and hours just getting backup jobs configured. It was functional, it worked, but to your point, Eric, make sure that you are actually using backups that are easy to use, effective, and are supported, right? The thing I mentioned, right? When budget does come in, you need to maximize risk reduction in the business. Supported backup application is part of that, right?
Yes.
Being able to call up the support team for that backup application and say, help if something ever goes wrong with it, is maximum risk reduction, in my opinion.
Yes.
So, am I missing any areas there, Eric? I mean, again, and maybe it's because I wear the security hat so often. I'm always thinking risk reduction when my budget is limited, right? Backups, perimeter, single points of failure. Anything
Well,
I'm missing?
what you'll run into is if they're doing risk analysis, then they may come to, like, insurance will pick up on some things. So, like, as long as they don't lose their data, they might decide that insurance will cover the other kinds of risks, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So definitely remember that. Um, I think that's the big thing.
Okay. And so the thing I wanted to make sure we also covered here before we start wrapping things up here is like, okay, you're in a budget strained environment. Maybe you're getting a trickle of budget, right? You're keeping things running. How do you make the case for actually getting budget in this type of environment? And I mean, no budget realistically is actually no budget yet, right? Those are two different things. No budget means no money ever at all. Realistically, it's probably no budget yet. Like, hey, we're going to give you some budget, but we don't have it to give it to you yet. And so what I find is that it often for the sysadmin becomes an act of translating technical risk into language that gets leadership to open those purse strings a little bit, right? And let me give you an example here. I had a customer manufacturing customer, they had it was a 2-node Hyper-V cluster running their, scratch that. No, these were standalone hosts because they did not have shared storage. These were 2 standalone Hyper-V hosts. Now, these were Dell systems that were 9, 10 years old. Typical lifespan of a server these days is 5 to 7 usually. And these were running flash storage, which have a limited number of writes, correct, before things go bad. And we did an assessment for them, and I flagged that like, hey, okay, these systems are old, they're out of support, you're running your entire business on these standalone hosts. You should probably look at replacing these systems, right? Because that's what we would normally do as IT people in this particular situation. Our point of contact was the owner of this business. The guy had built it from nothing, had a very engineer mindset, and was dead set serious that, you know what, I have a third server sitting on the shelf that is exactly the same. We can use it to replace any parts that fail in these two. And I acknowledged that. I'm like, sure, yes, you could. but you still run risks A, B, and C, right, of these systems failing. What is the cost of that SQL server going offline, right? What's your downtime per hour in that situation? He was able to tell me. And this was a situation where he was a nice guy. Don't get me wrong, very nice guy. It was like talking to a brick wall. When you're trying to convince someone that you need to do something but will not budge. And this is where I kind of had to stop myself, and I needed to, again, we're having a budgeting conversation here. This is where I had to stop and look at the situation from his perspective. This guy has had an engineering degree. He had designed and built the product that the company made and built the business from nothing. He understands things like failure rates, right? So what I did that ultimately almost immediately convinced him was I went and I pulled the serial numbers for all the hard drives, and I went and pulled industry data about the failure rates for those particular drives over time. They already had way over the number of supported writes, and I was able to show him that once you reach this many writes, your failure rate goes from here to here. And as soon as he saw that data, the whole conversation changed, right? So sometimes no budget means no budget yet until you can accurately convey the risk to the business, right?
Right. That does happen quite a bit. And other times I've also seen them like, well, that's why we have emergency funds, but we can't use emergency funds if there's no emergency. So,
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that too.
okay. That's not a
I've
decision I
seen.
would make, but all right.
Uh, and so that brings me to my next point. So we talk about being able to communicate technical risk into a language that leadership can take action on. Start documenting the risk of the aging gear in your environment, right? You know that, hey, that server sitting in the rack over there that is driving, I don't know, application X is 10 years old. It could fall over flat on its face any day now, right? You need to document that risk. And it is really helpful if you can pull in business metrics on that as well, too. So I don't know, let's stick with the manufacturing example. Let's say that particular server runs an application for one of the manufacturing lines. How much money does that manufacturing line make? And you might need to talk to somebody in leadership to find that out. Now, if that server is offline, how much money is being lost every hour that manufacturing line is offline? You can attach a real dollar amount to that system being offline. Now it changes from IT, saying they're afraid that something is going to fail. It changes the conversation from fear to risk management. I found that most leaders don't respond well to fear, right? So don't
No,
try going the fear route when in budget conversations. Turn it
no.
into risk management, tangibly explain the risk, and in true SysAdmin fashion, please cover your ass, right? If somebody chooses to not take action on a risk, get it in writing that, hey, on X date, I said that we should, fix system X because of risks A, B, and C. You, Mr. or Mrs., CEO, chose not to do that. And that is why we are down today, right? Just so you have that information. Hopefully you don't need it, but I have seen it more often than not where that information was useful. So,
Right.
um, so yeah, I feel like I've rambled a lot in this particular episode, Eric. It's kind of one of those topics that it helps when you have examples. And so, I mean, as we kind of stepped through the show today, it brought up things I remembered from my travels in the day, but I think we got our point across. And so, hey, again, if you want to find any of the links associated with the show, you can go out to www.sysadminweekly.com. Again, that'll get you all the links associated with the show. Be sure to check out the newsletter as well. And if you want to share any of your own I'm on a budget sysadmin stories, you can go out to the GitHub discussion forums there. I'd love to see what you guys are dealing with in the trenches. Also, if you have any types of questions on anything we talked about today, I know it's kind of a very meandering topic today, but it's an important one. So again, if you have any questions you'd like us to clarify, be sure to let us know in the comments. With that, we'll let you get back to your day. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you again next week for another episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Have a good one.